Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week on Deep Thoughts, we're talking about the end of the early years, Brad.
Possibly the end of SNL.
It could have been.
Could have been.
And we're lucky enough to talk about that with Doug Hill and Jeff Weingrad, once again, authors of Saturday Night, a backstage history of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, right before SNL 50, they were nice enough to sit down with us. We did a whole episode about the creation of the show and how SNL, then Saturday Night, came to be. So we thought it would be a nice way to kind of bookend everything, have them come back and talk about the end of the early years. And, you know, we talk about it could have been the SNL. Lorne thought it might have been the SNL. So this is a really fun conversation with the two of them.
It is. They're always great to talk to, and they're so generous with their time with us. So I think this is something that's really kind of a must listen. If you listen to us through the early years, it kind of helps explain what was going on with everyone and how it all wound down after season 5.
Mm-hmm.
Doug and Jeff, it's so good to talk to you two again. Thank you for joining us as we wrap up the end of what we call the early years of SNL, the first 5 years of Saturday Night Live.
Hi, guys.
Howdy.
Hey.
I think this is a good place. We can start with the end of the show, which I think, Jeff, doesn't really start with in season 5, right?
Well, it really doesn't, because the show really started its fall into its departure towards the end of season 3, going into season 4. And that is when Fred Silverman, he's hired by NBC to take over as NBC president, not just program, but NBC president. And he and Lorne are made from different cloths. And it's like a 2-year downhill slide between the two of them. So that's when it really starts. And it just doesn't stop until, the end of season 5, when Lorne and his gang are no longer there.
When Jeff says that Lorne and Silverman are made from different cloths, Silverman was the king of prime time, and he had a string of hits at ABC in particular that turned ABC from the perennial third place network into the first place network. And they were very, classic TV sort of crummy prime time comedies like Love Boat and Who's Company and that kind of thing. And he was a genius at that kind of stuff, but it was exactly the kind of stuff that Saturday Night Live made fun of, and that the whole generation that Saturday Night Live appealed to made them feel that television wasn't worth watching. So that was, as soon as he arrived at NBC, which was a gigantic event in the television industry, Lorne and Silverman were fated to come to blows, and we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Well, NBC was struggling, right? I mean, he wasn't pulling that charm on NBC. They were now the third place network often, right?
Everything had been upended because of Fred Silverman, and NBC and CBS, which had spent decades cruising along comfortably, trading off being in first or second place and making tons of money, suddenly found themselves in third place. And it was a traumatic event. And they paid Silverman a fortune to come and make it right again.
The only show I actually remember off the top of my head is, though, you remember, Doug, what was it called? Super Train? It was some sort of a mystery.
Yes, that says it all.
Mystery / comedy, all set on a train. But he dig as hard as he tried, he could not seem to find his magic and help NBC get out of the basement. And Lorne and SNL were, top of the heap. So they were going strong. The third season, fourth season, with all the difficulties that they did have in the fourth and fifth seasons, with John and Danny busy with other things, and Bill Murray busy with other things and rather crazy at times, and Gilda getting involved in other things with Lorne. The fact of the matter is that those seasons 4 and 5 were really, they were the kings of late night. of television. They were not just late night. They were the kings of television.
Well, you mentioned the show. I wanted to bring up kind of where the show was at this point. As you said, it kind of started at the end of season 3, season 4. Everyone's getting involved with other projects and stuff. Getting into season 5, we talked about this. John leaves the show, which people kind of saw, but we haven't really talked about the Dan Aykroyd leaving, which I think was kind of a surprise to Lorne, the effect that had on him and everybody, as well as Gilda. You mentioned, Gilda just did Gilda Live with Lorne, and she's exhausted, he's exhausted. So the show coming into the 5th season just feels like it's almost already running on fumes and not really knowing where it can lean on.
The amount of internal tensions and conflicts that occurred, especially in the 4th season, I reread that chapter in our book this morning. It was amazing how much cirrus there was during that season. Belushi had come off the Animal House and had started to feel like he was a major star. And then the Blues Brothers hit, and they got into a rivalry with the Gilda Live Broadway show, which started out to be a comedy album and ended up being a Broadway show and a national tour. And everybody was just fighting each other, and there were rivalries and tensions. And on top of it, they came into the 5th season kind of burned out. It was known well in advance of the 5th season that John was not coming back. But as you mentioned, it was not known what Danny was going to do as the 4th season went on. He had told Lorne that he would come back to be a performer, but not a writer. And they were making the Blues Brothers movie. And Lorne thought he had a commitment from Danny that Danny would be back. So everybody was sort of counting on that because they needed that, they needed him very much. And it turned out that John was basically trying to convince Danny not to come back. And people on the show are convinced that it was John who was responsible for Danny finally, after a lot of procrastination or hemming and hawing, decided not to come back. So they went into the 5th season really wondering what was going to happen without John and Danny.
And it was also the case that in that 4th season too, with all these various tensions, internal tensions, in SNL, just ratcheting up. I mean, it was almost like the beginning, or more than the beginning, of a civil war going on there, because Lorne and Gilda were very bonded. Gilda very much was was the cast member who always kind of was in Lorne's corner and behaved like Lorne wished everybody would behave. And as he was losing John and Danny to the movies and then to the Blues Brothers, there were so many problems inside the show as all this was happening, all these fireworks going off. They were just, John was so difficult to work with, and didn't make it back for a couple shows because he was splitting his time. They were flying him back and forth from New York to LA, and he'd get back on Wednesdays or Thursdays or Saturday afternoon. And it was crazy times. And John made it clear that he did not bend his knee to Lorne. And he had a strong, as Doug mentioned, a very strong hold on Danny. And Danny was really caught in the middle because Danny wanted to be loyal to Lorne, but he was best buddies with John, and he was working with him on all of a sudden, multi-million-dollar projects. This was no longer, if John goes and performs as Joe Cocker at Paul McCartney's party, he'll make $5,000. These are people throwing movie contracts at them for millions upon millions of dollars. And John just really bent Danny's arm, and he eventually got that way. But through that whole 4th season, John was driving Lorne nuts, and Lorne was so unhappy with him. They had a very difficult and cantankerous relationship, and it split the show. It definitely split the show. Poor Paul Schaefer was kind of the most caught in the middle, because Paul always felt he didn't get enough credit for really helping to create the Blues Brothers, but he was there with all the Blues Brothers stuff. But he also was there with Lorne, and Lorne was telling him he's got to work. When John and Danny were going their way, Lorne decided that he would push Gilda and produce Gilda, and they'd have a live comedy album, they'd have a TV show, they'd have a movie, they'd have a Broadway play. And people on the show sort of had to almost take sides at times. And so that was going on season 4 and 5, while Fred Silverman on the outside is just making life miserable too for Lorne, because he never appreciated Lorne and he never appreciated what the show was really doing, because his whole focus was on prime time. He drove Lorne crazy too, because he immediately said, we got to put Gilda in prime time. And he kept pushing this at Lorne with the slogan that he made Lorne crazy about: Wednesday night is Gilda time, or something like that.
Wednesday night at 9 is Gilda time was the phrase that he used.
But they finally had to say no to Fred, who wasn't happy about it. And it was just all this stuff bubbling up that made life difficult that 4th season, which led into John and Danny leaving, and then having a very different, very heavily leaning on Bill Murray season. And Bill was not Bill for the first 3/4 of the year, because he was Hunter Thompson, because he was Hunter Thompson in a movie. He absorbed the personality and was completely gonzo out of his mind. That's my take.
Well, and that's really apparent too. I mean, we just went through and rewatched all of season 5, and you can definitely tell in the first half of the season easily, Billy is not himself. He's not, he's kind of checked out in some ways and kind of pissed off.
Yeah, half the time he's pissed off.
Yeah, it's interesting. That comes across. It's been a long time since I watched it, but yeah, he was mad that everybody was depending on him to carry the show, and yet he was mad if he didn't get the attention that he wanted. And he had just split up with his romance with Gilda Radner, and they didn't talk to each other. They couldn't be put in a sketch together, and it was dangerous for them to even be in the same room together. And Jeff alluded to a very important point, that all this stuff going on with all the stardom and attention given to John and Danny's movie career and all that stuff, and Gilda Live, everybody else on the show felt neglected. And I don't know if jealous is quite the right word, but they were resentful of all this craziness that was going on, and the attention that they needed to make the show work was being neglected. And of course, most of all, Lorne felt very betrayed and upset with what was going on. And the last thing I'll mention is that people were all tired anyway from 4 crazy seasons of doing Saturday Night Live. As you guys know, it was not an easy production to make. And they came in exhausted already. And when they tried to come up with material, they found it very difficult to come up with material that didn't sound like it was something they'd already done. And so there was a lot of that kind of, oh man, what can we do now kind of feeling. And so the spirit throughout the show was very, shaken.
There's a funny story in the book, actually, that it only addresses a little of what Doug just said, but they had done 4 years of shows, and now they had to come up with something, and they didn't have the cast members that had helped carry the show. And Al Franken, he and his partner Tom Davis, they spent some time one day trying to figure out what time period in the long span back to the dinosaurs have we not done a sketch about, to try to come up with something different. And they came out, what'd they do? They came out with a sketch.
The hominids.
Hominids, yeah.
Hominids.
And Steve Martin, yeah.
So it wasn't so easy to, after 4 years, to be, you had to figure out how to be creative still.
So in that tumultuous 5th season now, everyone's exhausted. And you really, like I said, the first half of that season, not only do you see it with Billy, but you see it with Gilda. She just kind of disappears for some episodes. And, they don't really have the loss of John and Dan is so huge because you don't have those people. And I mean, that's so apparent, and we just watched that. But now, getting into the season and everything, as the season progresses, what is the relationship like between Lorne and Fred Silverman and NBC as a whole, Doug?
Well, as I say, they tried to make nice to each other or treat each other decently, but the chemistry was as bad as it could possibly be. Silverman was not succeeding in his campaign to resurrect NBC's primetime ratings. And so he became increasingly desperate and difficult to be around. And he was temper tantrums and throwing things and angry at everybody all the time. And he was infuriated that Lorne and Gilda turned him down. He wanted to make Gilda a primetime star. He had envisioned a big variety show for her in primetime. And he couldn't believe that they turned him down. But Gilda felt she was too tired to do a primetime show, and she didn't necessarily want to commit herself to 5 more years of, as Lorne put it, she didn't want to extend her TV sentence 5 more years. And Lorne, of course, was not comfortable working closely with Fred Silverman. He would have produced her show. And so they turned him down.
Which infuriated him.
Oh, it infuriated. He couldn't believe that they would turn him down. It was beyond imagination. And then they started to talk to Lorne about whether he would come back. And that turned into a very long series of bad meetings and misunderstandings and mixed signals. And that was a long and sad story. It's interesting how much personal feelings came into this business relationship. People were feeling disrespected. You don't like me. People stormed out of meetings because they thought they hadn't been given the attention and respect that they deserved. It's very interesting because, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars were at stake, and everybody was just ready to get mad at each other. It's fascinating.
To build on what Doug just was talking about, Fred Silverman with this wanting to put Gilda on in prime time, it wasn't just, well, this is a good idea. This was it wasn't a desperate measure, because if they pulled it off, it would have been fine. But NBC was in the toilet, and here comes the big programming magician who was going to fix this. And one of the first things he wanted, he said he didn't understand. He never really grasped SNL. He was not SNL generation, and he never really grasped it and didn't really appreciate it. But he wanted to put Gilda, he saw as the new Lucille Ball. And he wanted to put this show in prime time. And he thought that was going to be the start of a big fix that would continue to raise his reputation to the heavens. And they said no. And his response afterwards, he told some people, and we put it in the book, that after Lorne turned him down on that, Fred's response about Lorne was, am I allowed to use the F word on this show?
Yeah.
His response to Lorne, he didn't say it directly, but he told another executive of his, fuck him. And he also said, when anybody would bring up Lorne's name, he'd say, well, fuck him, and who gives a shit?
Well, and to follow up on that, as we get into the specifics, Doug mentioned there's a few specific events that happen. Overarching, as you're talking about Fred Silverman, NBC, in the springtime, we finally get to the negotiations with Lorne Michaels, which is really where this all falls. It's whether Lorne comes back and Saturday Night Live comes back or not. How much attention was NBC giving the show and Lorne at this time? Because it's funny, and you guys touch upon it a little bit on the book, I think. There's another figure kind of off in the shadows sort of at this time that also played a key part in the show being created, and that's Johnny Carson.
Yes.
You said NBC's in the toilets, they're also battling Johnny Carson at this time. So I just wanted to, if maybe, Jeff, if you could touch on just how dire straits NBC was and how much attention were they giving the show at this time, like really believing Lorne might leave?
Well, they weren't giving enough, that's for sure. Lorne felt that they paid way too much attention to. No, look, Carson deserved attention, but Lorne felt that he was not being paid attention to at all, and all they cared about was the great Johnny Carson. They were both negotiating contracts at the same time. Lorne felt that he knew that with just based on what you saw in season 5, that he was going to have to rebuild this show, and it wasn't going to be an easy task. He asked if he could get several months off, give the show a 6-month hiatus till the next season, and that he would get a new cast and he would get in new blood and new writers. And he had an idea that he'd have his guest hosts, but now and then on a regular basis, he'd bring in some of the old guard SNL heroes to host the shows. And he was trying to figure out how he could make that work. And he suggested all this to him. And he also suggested that Lorne himself could sort of take a deep breath by, instead of being the everyday producer who pulls his hair out 90 times a day, he could become the executive producer, just kind of oversee things. And he could put in one of his team to produce the show. And he wanted Franken and Davis to do it. And that's what he was hoping that would happen. But as things came out towards the end of that 5th season, they came down to, they were supposed to be dealing with Lorne. They had a big meeting set up in the beginning of May, and things fell apart for several reasons all around that, which is another story of its own, and you can take it from there.
I can fill in a little bit of that story. As Jeff said, NBC was paying a lot of attention to renegotiating Johnny Carson's contract, and Lorne felt neglected, that he wasn't getting the same kind of attention. And then Carson signed his contract, and it was a gigantic fortune. But Lorne was still willing to stay, but he wanted to have the adjustments that Jeff talked about. Lorne had also just signed a 3-picture deal with one of the movie studios. So that was another reason, beyond just being exhausted and beyond the fact that he knew Bill Murray would not be coming back and that he'd have to rebuild the show. He needed some time to rebuild. And they immediately said that that was not possible because advertising for the next season had already been sold, and that they wouldn't be able to give him that. But they were willing to come in his direction on other things, but not that. And Lorne was being vague about what he would do or wouldn't do. He thought that he had basically let them know that he wasn't coming back, but he never made that clear to NBC. And at the big meeting that Jeff just talked about, Fred Silverman did not show up because he was supposedly sick. And that was another sign to Lorne that, if they don't want me, I don't want them. So the relationship between NBC and Lorne were about as bad as they could get. And then Al Franken entered the scene.
Well, we should say that the time frame of this is extremely scrunched, right? This meeting you're talking about where Fred Silverman doesn't show up is the week of this infamous Al Franken limo for lamo bit. So he misses the meeting during the week. I think Lorne, you guys right, actually did finally meet with Fred Silverman the day before on Friday, and they discussed some terms, and Lorne's like, let me think about it. I'm going to get back to you over the weekend or whatnot. And this is where things come up, whether Lorne knew or whatnot. But then we get into the infamous Al Franken weekend update limo for lamo.
Right. Well, the meeting was on May 8th, which I believe, if my math is correct, it's a Thursday. And the show was on May 10th. And Silverman doesn't show up. But worse, he was supposedly was up all night with Brandon Tartikoff, who was the top programmer at NBC. And he just couldn't make this meeting. He never called Lorne to say sorry. He could have even sounded like he had a sore throat if he wanted. I just can't make it. So Lorne was very angry about that. And the meeting just devolved into, Lorne just feeling he was horribly insulted. And he and Bernie Brillstein, who was his manager / guru, they could not believe the way that NBC was treating Lorne. And they did walk out. Fred, the next day, calls Lorne and says, please, we got to meet. We got to meet. You can't just walk out, because Lorne said he was done when they walked out of the meeting. But Fred checks in. He meets with Fred, but Fred comes to the meeting. It's almost like he's not there either. He walks in. So what do we have? Comes in with a version of Lorne's contract. And he had hardly looked at it seems. So what do we got here? And he's like going through the contract.
No, Jeff, I think you're confusing two meetings. That was the first meeting that Lorne and Bernie walked out of. Silverman's lieutenant, Irv something or other, had run that meeting, the one that Silverman didn't show up with. And he pulled out Lorne's contract after asking Lorne if Lorne could get his daughter tickets to a Rolling Stones concert. And he pulled out his contract and said, "What do you want?" Showing that he'd given absolutely no thought. But with the meeting with Silverman, Silverman really did try to make it up to him and offered him a fortune. His lieutenant, Barbara Gallagher, said that Fred offered everything, the world, a primetime series, specials, movies, in addition to Saturday Night Live. And Barbara Gallagher said that the package was worth $4 to $5 million for Lorne. So he had come making an effort because he knew he didn't like Saturday Night Live. He didn't like Lorne, but he knew he needed Saturday Night Live. And that was where things stood when a day or two later, Al Franken went on Saturday Night Live with his limo for a limo.
So what then was the fallout from that? Because if this happens, like you're saying, right, this is like a day or two later, Al Franken comes on with the infamous limo for lamo. What happens right after that?
I assume you guys have covered limo for a lamo in your show about the fifth season, right?
We did, yes.
Yeah, it's a great bit.
Well, it certainly comes.
We actually held off diving into it because we knew we were going to talk to you guys about it. So we didn't dive into it too much, but we did talk about it.
So we should explain what it was.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, Al Franken was he had a rough edge to his personality in terms of thinking that what he thought was funny, and Lorne pretty much has this breakdown with Fred Silverman on a Thursday, and on Saturday he comes to Lorne with a sketch that he's written about Fred Silverman.
Real quick, Jeff. Al doesn't know about the negotiation that week, though, right? Like, he's oblivious to all that.
That's a good question. I'm not sure what we said in the book about that, and I don't have a note about that. That's a good question.
I would guess that he didn't know because Lorne would not be prepared to let everybody on Saturday Night Live know that he wasn't coming back.
That's true.
But I'm not sure we answer that question in the book.
Right.
And so I would guess that he would not have known that.
Right. But in the sketch, he just attacks Fred Silverman. He basically starts out by saying that he's Al Franken and he had trouble getting a cab, and it's ridiculous that he has to take cabs because everybody at NBC except me, Al Franken, and it is the Al Franken decade. So he says that he should have a limo, and he says the worst example, however he puts it, is that Fred Silverman has a limousine anytime he wants, and Al then dubs it limo for the lamo.
But now get this. You know who gets complete door-to-door limousine service from NBC? Fred Silverman. Now, here's a guy who is a total, unequivocal failure. Okay, the guy's been here 2 years, and he hasn't done diddly squat. Okay, and he gets a limo. Now, here's a list. Okay, of the top 10 rated shows this season in TV. Now, there's some A's there, some B's, some C's, some S's. You see those? You see any N's? No! Not one N. Why? Because Silverman is a lamo. But he still gets limousine service. I like to call it a limo for the lamo. Okay, now this is where you come in and you can help me, Al Franken. I want all of you to write NBC and pressure them to get me a limousine. Now, just send a letter or postcard to Get Al Franken a Limo, care of Fred Silverman, NBC TV, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, New York, New York, 10020. Now, this is very important. Write this address down now. Don't worry. I'll yell so you won't miss anything. Now, if enough of you write, Silverman will have to give me the limo. Even though I've just decimated him, that's the way things are around here. He's timid, indecisive, and easily pressured. He's weak.
And this is what he's going to do. But Barbara Gallagher, who was Fred's chief assistant at this point, and Barbara actually was somebody who worked on the show briefly in the first year, I believe it was. And Barbara comes to see the dress rehearsal, and she sees this limo for the lamo sketch, and she begs Al Franken to not do it And Al just says, he's got to do it. It's funny. And she says, can you tone it down? And he says, well, and he just goes ahead and does it. And then on the air show, Brandon Tartikoff shows up. And Brandon thought it was funny that Brandon was laughing through it.
Brandon was the head of programming.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when Fred saw it, he was just devastated. Barbara Gallagher painted a picture of Fred and quotes him as saying, like, just how unbelievably hurt he was, et cetera, et cetera. And then they get Al to write an apology directly to Fred the next day. But the first take, he couldn't send it to him because it was barely an apology and made things worse. But he then made a second attempt and they sent it to him. But the damage had been done and Fred kind of just threw up his hands and kind of that was it in terms of the complete breakdown between Fred and Lorne and the show.
A couple of nice details about the show that Limo for a Lamo. As Jeff said, Brandon Tartikoff, the head of NBC programming under Silverman, did attend the show. And after Limo for a Lamo, Silverman called the studio immediately and asked to talk to Tartikoff. And one of the assistants came down and told Tartikoff Fred was on the line. And Tartikoff said, tell him I'm not here. And Barbara Gallagher walked into her apartment at home after she left the show, and the phone was ringing, and Fred was on the line. And as Jeff said, he was devastated. And he kept saying over and over again, why? Why would they do this to me? And it was kind of sad, really. But he just, he was very hurt. And as Jeff said, that was really the end of any chance that Lorne was going to be coming back to Saturday Night Live.
Did it play that big of a role? I was curious. I know you guys write in the book a bit that obviously it ended any chance of Al Franken succeeding Lorne, but you guys do think it really did torpedo just even Lorne even coming back in any way?
Well, Tartikoff at that point felt that he had to do something to make sure that the show would survive. And he didn't feel that the relationship between Lorne and Silverman after Limo for a Lamo was so destroyed that he didn't feel that he could count on Lorne coming back. And so Tartikoff started to make moves to find somebody else to produce Saturday Night Live. And he approached a producer he knew on the West Coast who couldn't do it. And then Barbara Gallagher, Silverman's lieutenant or assistant, really, suggested the talent coordinator on the show, Jean Doumanian, who was a friend of hers. And I'll stop there. I don't want to get too far ahead, but I do think the reason that Limo for a Lamo really ended the chance that Lorne would come back was that Tartikoff felt he didn't have any more time to work on it. He had to make a move.
So then 2 weeks after Limo for Lamo is the final episode. So it's after Limo for Lamo. We have I guess the falling out happens right away from that, right? Buck Henry hosts and you get this sense that they're done. The monologue kind of lays no bones about it. He introduces a new cast, talks about a new producer. How
it was a joke cast.
Right. Yes. It was a joke cast.
Yeah.
Carl Quackenbush.
Yeah.
You really feel the uncertainty in that episode, Jeff. How uncertain was it for the cast and the crew and everyone on the show, but then also for the actual public, for people watching this episode? What was the sense of the show? Did they know anything?
Yeah, I watched it live. I remember watching it live, and my mindset at that point was that things were being juggled during that season so much and had so many new people that this was going to be the end of Lorne's show.
Well, I think I can answer that question. It was not certain within the show whether that Lorne's time with Saturday Night Live was truly finished and what would happen next either way. In other words, there had been no announcement made at that point. And as I'm sure you guys probably discussed, that show ends with the shot of the on-air, off-air sign just outside the studio, and the light goes from on-air to off. Right. which is a pretty clear signal that something's going on. And Buck Henry, during the goodbyes, says not only good night, but says goodbye. But Lorne gave everybody on the show, the staff and the performers, a lighter in the shape of a 30 Rock. And it was inscribed, I think, "Nice working with you," I believe was the inscription, 1975 to 1980. And that in itself was a little bit ambiguous. He had never done anything like that before. So that was a sign that, yeah, maybe it is over. But on the other hand, there was never any announcement made that he was not coming back, either within the show or publicly. So there was a little bit of uncertainty at that point about what would happen.
Yeah, there was uncertainty without a doubt, but I do think that pretty much everybody realized that they had played out what they could play out during those 5 years, because everything had changed. And the fifth season was so different, and new people everywhere. And it looked like a show that was something had to be done. I don't recall if the public was aware of it.
That's what we were curious about, because I knew you guys were writing about it at the time, and it's very easy for us now with everything that's been written, even today's society, like everybody knows what's going on behind the scenes. But we were curious back then, fans of the show, if you're tuning in every Saturday and watching it, did you have any idea before Buck says anything like, oh, this show might not come back?
Well, again, I just think it was something that was unspoken, but people just sort of were expecting. You know, I do remember as a journalist covering television a lot back then, that it must have been after the third year and after the fourth year. I remember talking to Lorne right before or right after the last show, and he told me, and I would write a story about it because it was coming right out of his mouth, and I could put quote marks about it. He told me he was quitting the show, and that he just worked too hard, and he couldn't do it anymore, so I'm quitting the show. Heck, until he tells me that he's coming back, I can write a story quoting him saying he's quitting the show. So at the end of the season, for 2 years in a row, I wrote a piece saying Lorne's quitting the show. And then he'd call me in mid-August, and say, well, I've had a really good summer. I'm very rested. I'm coming back. And I'd write a story. Again, Lorne Michaels is coming back as the host of SNL.
Having renegotiated his contract.
Right. It's amazing how that helps you regain your energy.
Yes, it does. Another factor that played into that last show was that everybody was exhausted, and the press had been writing for years, as they have continued to write for the subsequent 40 years or whatever, 50 years, that the Saturday Night Live was burned out and was terrible. And Lorne had a great quote: "It's all going to plan. Saturday Night Live is going to just keep getting less and less funny every year, and then it'll never be funny again."
Right.
Well, speaking of less funny, we should talk about Jean Doumanian. Hindsight, it's very easy to look. I see Doug thought it was funny.
I did.
It's very easy to look back now based on what happened and say it was a horrible choice to give the show over to Jean Doumanian. But as you guys who were there at the time and had written about it closer to when it actually happened, can you walk us through a little bit of NBC's reasoning? Why is Jean Doumanian picked, and why does NBC think this is the best way to move forward without Lorne?
I'm happy to try. The fact of the matter is that it was a stupid choice. I mean, no disrespect to Jean Doumanian, but she was not the person for the job. As Lorne tried to tell NBC, because they kept it secret for a week from Lorne, actually. And then when they told him, he just told anybody who would listen that she's just not the right person. She had been an associate producer with Lorne, working under him, and then she
talent coordinator.
Well, that came in, I think, in the last year or two.
Oh, okay.
But she had no experience running a show. She had no comedic experience. She lacked a sense of humor that you could call an SNL sense of humor. It was a terrible choice. And there's a quote from Lorne. He was interviewed by, it's not in our book, but he was interviewed by the AP soon after Jean was hired. And his quote was something to the effect of, "The show is dead. The only ones that don't know it is NBC." And she just was the wrong person for the job. And unfortunately for her, almost all of Lorne's team left, the behind the scenes team, the writers, the production people, all the cast. And so she had to start from scratch, and she was nowhere up to the job. It was just a bad choice, wrong person in the wrong job. She's a smart person. She knows how to handle talent, and she makes people happy. But she had to put together a cast. She had to put together all these writers, and it just didn't work. And it was gone after the 11th show.
Let me explain why NBC did hire her. And everything Jeff said is absolutely correct. She was a terrible choice. She was a person who worked on the show and had a position on the show, and that meant to NBC. And when we say NBC, Brandon Tartikoff, the head of programming, made this decision, and he was the one who was trying to find a replacement for Lorne. And Barbara Gallagher, Fred Silverman's assistant, who had worked on Saturday Night Live, as Jeff mentioned, in the first season, and so was known as a friendly person connected to the show, who was also a friend of Jean Doumanian. Barbara Gallagher recommended Jean Doumanian, and Tartikoff was important to him that someone on the show be named the producer, because there would be continuity there. And he had a bit of an idea that perhaps Lorne would help her get on her feet. This was before he'd ever talked to Lorne about it, by the way. But he did ask Lorne about Jean Doumanian, and Lorne, before he hired her, and Lorne said, no, she's not qualified for the job and no one will work for her. But for whatever reason, Tartikoff ignored that. Barbara Gallagher pointed out that Jean Doumanian was a very talented talent coordinator who had the music that she chose for the show and for her own show when she got the job was outstanding. And she had produced a special with the comic team of Bob and Ray, who were big heroes of the people on Saturday Night Live. So she had that one special producing credit. And the other thing is that Brandon Tartikoff, we interviewed him, and he said, you know, as crazy as this sounds, I was so obsessed with trying to fix prime time and trying to keep Silverman from either killing me or jumping out a window himself that I just had to make a decision. And it's interesting that he didn't tell Lorne that he had hired her. Lorne found out by accident. Jean had already been hired to head the New York production office for Paramount Pictures, and Lorne ran into Barry Diller, the head of Paramount, at a movie premiere, and Barry said, is Jean Doumanian producing Saturday Night Live? And Lorne said, I don't know. And so when he found out that that was the truth and that he hadn't even been told, and that Jean Doumanian hadn't asked him or said anything to him about whether she was up for the job or being hired, that was it for Lorne. He washed his hands of the show, and that was that.
And also the fact was that one thing that Brandon Tartikoff couldn't do was to pick the new producer that Lorne had suggested, which was Franken and Davis. So he went with Jean Doumanian, and much of the choice also, although Brandon obviously knew Jean Doumanian, it was Barbara Gallagher again that gave her a glowing recommendation to Brandon that she ought to be the one.
One other factor that was helpful in Doumanian getting a job is she had an interview with Brandon Tartikoff. And Jean Doumanian was a very stylish, very polished person. She made a good impression on people. They liked her, and she had this an air of competence and confidence. And Tartikoff was impressed, and that was sort of the last thing that made him decide to hire her.
So then, she has to, you guys mentioned this already. She brings in an entirely new, not just cast, but entirely new writing crew, other, production people and everything. So everyone's new. What was the sense, the overall feelings heading into season 6 for that new crew, and also for NBC and Tartikoff? Were they excited about this?
I don't know if the word is that it would be that they were excited about it, but they thought it would go on, and I think that they put blinders on and felt that, well, Gene's going to do the job, Gene's going to do the job, and then sort of like went away and see what we'll get. But immediately what they get was just stupendously not up to the job. I mean, the reviews at the very beginning were just horrific, and then downhill from there.
Well, I think there were two feelings for people who Gene hired. They knew that they were coming in trying to replace legends and that they had their work cut out for them in that respect. But they also, this is a job on a very famous, very popular show. For a lot of people, that's a career break you don't turn down. And they had hopes. They had hopes that they could make it work and that they would make the show their own. They were sadly mistaken, as we know, and they didn't get the help they needed from Gene. But, if somebody's going to offer you a lot of money to come work for a very famous TV show, a lot of people, especially writers, I can tell you personal experience, a big paycheck is hard to turn down.
Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to anybody who came onto the show. They had high hopes, and they thought they were going to do a good job, but it just wasn't there. And they ended up with some people that Gilbert Gottfried was on that show, and they ended up with some people who were competent and good, but the writing was horrific, and the sketches were just shockingly bad, and it just really, from the very first moment it came on, it just wasn't working. And for NBC and Fred Silverman, the contrast in terms of making money off of Saturday Night Live went from mind-boggling to chillingly numbing in terms of how low you can go. At the end of the fifth season, NBC was making $40-50 million a year for the last couple of years for NBC, and now I'm selling ads for $20, $25, $30,000 for 30 seconds, and now they were back down to where they started 5 years ago, and no one was happy with it. It went nowhere, that show. It went backwards badly.
It's ironic that Gene had the title talent coordinator. And as I mentioned, she really was very good at booking music people. Prince was one of the people that she booked before he was a superstar, as an example. But the people that she chose for the cast were just terrible, almost all of them. Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy were bright spots together and individually, but the level of the performances were just, and a lot of the writing also just wasn't good.
Yeah, and that's evident if you ever spend any time watching season 6. So
I'll try to avoid that.
Yeah.
That was my problem.
It must be said that Jean had her Lorne's office redecorated, and apparently it was really a wonderful thing to see. So she did have that going for her.
When I have spoken about this, one thing that I don't know if it's in the book, but it's very hard to replace a legend, and you really, it's almost an impossible task. And the other thing is, as we end that part of the book, one of the writers talked to us about the fact that it was like the movie. What was the movie, Doug? Rebecca? Is that the name of the movie?
Yes.
Where the ex-wife who died is like everywhere. And she was such a wonderful, great person, but she's no longer there, and there's nothing you can do to really fill those shoes. It becomes very, very hard.
Yeah.
There's one thing I'd like to say about what happened in the fourth and fifth seasons. Let me read this to you. It may be of use, but as I said, I just reread our chapters on the fourth and fifth seasons in preparation for this. And I was really stunned at how nasty and, conflictual things got, given the exuberance of the beginnings of the show. And we had put in our book a foreword. Forgive me if this is out of place, but I'd like to read it. The authors would like to underscore at the outset that this book is about people, highly creative and consciously eccentric people for the most part, who were operating under extreme pressure. In particular, the effects on the psyche of major stardom, though a part of popular legend, are underestimated. Readers are urged to keep this in mind. And, I realized why we had written that after I reread those chapters, because it was sad what happened. We quote Terry Garr, who came to host in the 5th season, and she used those words. She said, everybody was bitching, complaining all the time, and it was sad. And I think it was sad, but it probably was inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I second that emotion.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you both. This is the third time you guys have been gracious enough to talk to us. The last time was right around SNL 50, where we had a conversation about the creation of SNL. So as we finished the 5 years, we wanted to get you guys back, kind of bring everything to a close. So thank you, Doug and Jeff. Anybody who doesn't know their book by this point, I don't know why you're listening, but Saturday Night, A Backstage History of Saturday Night Live, it, as Gary mentioned, has been our Bible for 5 seasons. I love this book. I've always loved this book. So thank you guys for writing it and for coming back with us one more time to talk about SNL.
Thank you very much.
We want to say we appreciate on all 3 shows we've done with you guys, your research and knowledge has been really impressive. And I just want to say good job and thank you.
I mean, we're just parroting your book, but thank you.
Yeah. I mean, if we did this episode without you, we just would have been quoting the book. So we're like, let's just bring them in and let them say their own words, because that's all we would do.
Thank you much. You guys have been a pleasure. You guys have been a pleasure.
It's always great. Always great talking to you guys. Maybe we'll talk to you again at some point in the future. You can tell us whatever happened to Lorne Michaels after he left the show. I'm curious to know if anything came of that guy. It's always a pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
You got it. All right. See you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Well, Brad, that was a great, fun conversation as always with Doug and Jeff.
As always. Yep.
Those guys are really good. They were so immersed in that world while they were writing that book that it's interesting to hear them and their thoughts on that time.
Yeah, and it's such a great book. As I said, we've said I think everybody has it. But if for some reason you don't have it and you're curious, Jeff and Doug did tell us that they've recently, their publishers are new deal with Simon & Schuster. So the book is back out and it's out everywhere you get books. So if you haven't read this or need a new copy of it, please check it out again. The book is Saturday Night, A Backstage History to Saturday Night Live. Great book, and a huge thanks to Doug and Jeff for talking to us.
And it doesn't just another plug for it. It's not just the first 5 years of SNL. It's the first 10 years of SNL. So
that's right. Yeah.
They go through the coming years and what happens after Lorne leaves and everybody leaves. Well, Brad, coming up, we have a companion piece to this conversation with Doug and Jeff.
Yeah. Yeah, as you've now listened, this was kind of a nuts and bolts discussion. Another author that we've talked to that's been really great is Susan Morrison, who wrote the book last year, Lorne. And we have a conversation with her where we talk Lorne of it all, what Lorne was thinking and his mindset and just how he took everything and kind of the Lorne version of the story or side of the story. So keep an eye out in a couple of days. We're going to put out our conversation to kind of, companion piece with this, talking about Lorne and Lorne's exit from the show with Susan Morrison.
Another interesting conversation with an author who knows the subject that they wrote about and brought interesting perspective to that conversation about his time in the late 70s, early 80s Lorne. So until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Our new publisher has made a contract with entered into a contract with Simon & Schuster. So in terms of if it can be said, the book can be found anywhere that people buy their books. That's the response. And if the anywhere says we don't have it, you can ask them because Simon & Schuster will see that you get a copy.